Hi, and welcome to the Love Monday podcast. This is our next episode, and I'm glad you joined me today. I hope you'll subscribe to the Love Monday podcast because that's going to help spread this word that I want to be spreading around the world. I've been working on this for years, but it's not making a very big impact yet. So your help by subscribing to this is really going to help us out. Now, we're going to talk about a concept that I've alluded to in previous episodes called the zone of genius, and it's from a book called The Big Leap. And it's by Gay Hendricks, and he talks about this zone of genius extensively in here. Talks about also the other zones, the zone of incompetence, the zone of competence, the zone of excellence, the zone of genius. We'll talk about all those things. But this, I've alluded to this in previous episodes, but this came up dramatically on Sunday with a very, very dear friend of mine. We were waiting for a plane at the airport, and she started asking a couple of questions, and it made me think of, she started talking about things she does in her career and things she's done in her career, and it made me think of this concept of the zone of genius. And when she started asking these questions, and I don't even remember the specific questions, but it sort of lit me up because I knew she was on to this whole zone of genius concept. So I thought this is a perfect time to share. She gives me credit for teaching a lot of stuff, and I kind of want to dedicate this episode to her because she gives me credit for teaching her a lot of stuff, but I have clearly, in my mind, gained the most from her over the time we've known each other, and it's just been a couple of months. It's been really great. But in our conversation waiting for that plane last Sunday, we got into one of the best conversations I've ever had, and like I say, it just sort of lit me up because all of a sudden I knew she was bridging on understanding what her zone of genius is. After a long and illustrious career doing several different things, I could tell she was hitting on it. We weren't even talking about this, but that's when I got to introduce or reintroduce to her this whole concept of the zone of genius. So in that conversation while waiting for this plane, one of the things her example is she's an exceptional teacher, coach, and an inspiration to me and many other people. I mean, she tells me these stories about how when she's teaching a class, how the learners in that class will just get engaged over things that she thinks, that's not that exciting. But her learners come to her after and say, sometimes she's substituting in a class or filling in for somebody else, and her learners will come to her and say, can you keep teaching this class? Because she's that good at what she does. And so we're talking about this, and she's talking about how she's in a field of study that's doesn't have anything to do with being an exceptional teacher, coach, or an inspirational speaker, but that's what she's doing. And so as we talked about that, she said, then I'm pursuing the wrong field. And I said, no, you're not. You're not pursuing the wrong field. It's just that you're getting clarity on what your zone of genius is. And as you get that clarity and you understand what it is, and you can look back on times when you've been in your zone of genius, even for little spurts of time, but you see that's what your zone of genius is, you will continue to strive for that, to get back to that. And it doesn't really matter what field of study you're in. Once you know what your zone of genius is, you're going to work toward that. Now, I suppose you could be in a completely wrong field of study where you don't have opportunities to work in your zone of genius. And yeah, in those cases, I think they're probably more rare. You might want to change your plan. And again, if you feel like you're going down the wrong path, after you're listening to this, you kind of get a feel for where your zone of genius is and you're going down the wrong path, don't necessarily believe it's the wrong path. And I'll use this example, the same example with my friend, where she said, I think I'm on the wrong path. She's studying a very specific field of study in tech. And I said, no, you're not on the wrong path. That's your key into organizations and into jobs where you're going to then be able to move into your zone of genius. But the exact field of study you're studying, yes, that's not going to be where you're going to be. You're not going to be there. As you get into the industry, you'll get into that industry, but then you're going to find and you're going to gravitate to, and people are going to want you to be an exceptional teacher and coach and someone who inspires other people. They're going to put you in positions because those positions exist everywhere for that thing that's her zone of genius. And it'll be the same, whatever your zone of genius is, it'll be the same for you. It goes along with the quote I frequently go back to from Steve Martin, the actor and comedian, producer. He said when he was asked, how do I make it in show business? And he said it simply comes down to this, and this is always his answer. Be so good they can't ignore you. Whoever they are, whoever the decision makers are, the powers that be in that industry that you're in, be so good that they can't ignore you. And then they'll help you gravitate towards your zone of genius. And that's how it's been for me. And that's why I am in my zone of genius probably about 85% of the time. I'm trying to push it to 100. That's the ideal. And we'll talk about what the difference is there, what that looks like. But I'm working my way, and I'm a lot farther than most people. Most people that I talk to when we talk about the zone of genius, and as you understand it more through this episode, you'll probably say, you probably be thinking, no, I do good work, and I'm in my zone of genius all the time. I'm in my zone of genius 80% of the time or 90% of the time. I'll bet you're not. As we start to define this, you're going to find that you're probably in your zone of genius maybe 10, 15% of the time. The rest of the time, you're doing stuff that you probably shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be wasting your time on. We'll talk about opportunity cost as well in all of this. My degree in economics is going to help me with that. So let's get into the details of this. Again, the book is The Big Leap. I'm going to keep plugging that throughout here because that's where you're going to get the most detail on this. And I'm going to summarize it for this podcast. Again, give credit to Gay Hendricks, who is a professional in this area, and he's the author of the book. But let's go into these different zones as he describes them in the book, The Big Leap. He talks about the zone of incompetence, the zone of competence, the zone of excellence, and the zone of genius. So the zone of incompetence, and we've all at one time or another spent either minutes or hours or days or weeks or months or years in all of these zones. Hopefully the zone of incompetence we haven't spent more than minutes, but I find some people spend a lot of time in the zone of incompetence. And the zone of incompetence is where pretty much anyone else can do the job better than you. Have you ever had that? You're working on a job and it's the opposite of a peak experience. It's where it's like trying to write with your non-dominant hand. That's a good example of working in your zone of incompetence. You could write with your dominant hand, and that might be a zone of excellence for you, but for most people, it's a zone of competence to write with your dominant hand. But writing with your non-dominant hand is a zone of incompetence. So if I'm right-handed and I try to write with my left hand, pretty much anybody else could do it better, especially anybody who's left-handed. They'd be able to do it better than me. So trying to write something with my left hand is my zone of incompetence. Trying to write something with my right hand, I'm not that great. My penmanship's not that great. That's just a zone of competence for me. Somebody who's really good, maybe with calligraphy or different types of script and has a beautiful, beautiful penmanship or script or however they write, they are maybe working in their zone of excellence. And there might be a few people who write with their dominant hand and they're in their zone of genius, but we'll get to that. So zone of incompetence is pretty much where anybody else could do it better than you can do it. And so why are you spending time there? So if you think of things where you've been in your zone of incompetence, a job that you just hated, where you were watching the clock, where time passed extremely slowly, you had to keep consulting the instructions on what is it I'm even supposed to be doing. I have to go back to that. I hate this. It's draining my energy, and I hope I never have to do it again. That's your zone of incompetence. And your zone of competence can be that way a little bit. It can be a bit of a drudgery, but at least you probably know how to do it. Again, it's the difference between writing with your non-dominant hand and your dominant hand. So then let's talk about the zone of competence. This is a zone where pretty much anyone else can do it as well as you can. I can write with my my dominant hand all day, but anybody else writing with their dominant hand, they're going to do just as well, maybe some of them better. And so that's kind of the difference there. So when we think about these two, the zone of incompetence, if you had a job where you had to spend a lot of time in your zone of incompetence, again, you hated it. It was a drudgery. You hope to never have to do it again. Your zone of competence, this is where some people unfortunately reside for a lot of years even. They might be in their zone of competence where it's not inspirational work. They find, if we were to rank people on the team, People in the zone of competence are just kind of middle of the pack. They're not standing out at all. And so if you're a manager of people and you have that sort of ranking in your head or on paper or whatever, as far as how people are doing, your people in the middle are working in their zone of competence. That's the bottom line. And you want to, in your top performers, while some of them might be in their zone of genius, and we're going to get there, most of your people at the top of your ranking on your team are working in their zone of excellence. They're not branching or breaking through to their zone of genius. They're in their zone of excellence, and you like them there, quite honestly. We'll talk about that too. But your people at the bottom of your ranking, again, if you're a manager and you've ranked your people, again, either formally or in your head, you know who's at the top, who's in the middle, who's at the bottom. Your people at the bottom are probably operating in their zone of incompetence. They're doing things they're not good at, and so that's why they're at the bottom. They keep screwing it up. They can't focus on it. It's just... So a lot of times when we're looking as managers at helping people love Monday just like Friday, we need to look at those bottom people and really dig into why they're there. And a lot of managers don't do this. They don't really care. They say, well, they're at the bottom. I got to weed them out. But it's not always about that. It's about, are they in their zone of incompetence, and what can you do as a manager to help them? And if you're a person in your zone of incompetence, what are you doing to help yourself? Because that's the most important thing. Are you stuck in a job where you've got a bad boss? Mistake number 4 of the reasons, the mistakes people make that make them hate Monday. If you got a bad boss and you're keeping that bad boss because that bad boss is keeping you in your zone of incompetence, you need to make a change. You need to get rid of that boss. And the start for that is to talk to that boss to see if that boss can get better. And if not, dump that boss ASAP. Some people are in such a bad zone of incompetence with such a bad boss, I would say go quit that job, and even before you got another one. Anything else would be better than keeping that bad boss. So that's one reason we're in the zone of incompetence. We're given work that we're not good at doing, and nobody seems to care about it. Not even us, not even ourselves. So get out of the zone of incompetence. The zone of competence, again, these are your middle of the pack people. If you're a middle of the pack person, you probably know it. You're just kind of phoning it in. You're coming to work every day. You're doing the job. You're not standing out. You're not getting recognized or rewarded for doing great work because, frankly, you're not doing great work. You're doing average work. You're just being competent. And you could be replaced at any given time at the whim of somebody else. Is that where you want to stay? No, you don't want to stay in your zone of competence. So, again, you can do it, but anybody else could do it just as well as you. That's the zone of competence. So let's move to the zone of excellence. Your zone of excellence is where most people live their lives. This is where they spend their careers. This is the majority of good work, or the majority of where good work is done is in the zone of excellence. And we would think, oh, these are, again, if you're a manager and you've ranked your people, they're at the top of the heap. They're at the top of the list. And you're like, oh, this is great. I've got these people at the top. I want to keep them there. And some poor managers, when I say poor, I'm not poor pitifully, well, yeah, that too, but poor managers who aren't good at being a manager tend to like to keep their top performers there, and they tend to hold them back. And in fact, my friend that I was talking to at the airport, she's told me stories about where she was in a certain organization she was a part of where she was told, you're far too valuable to promote. You're far too valuable to be sent anywhere else. So we're going to keep you where you are. They were keeping her in a zone of excellence, and it was not speaking to her. So she had to make moves to get out of that position and move into something else where she could move on to more excellent work. Anyway, so that's where, as a manager, you want to keep people there because, and bad managers are thinking, I got to keep them as long as possible. I got to like shut down their access to other job opportunities if I can. I need to make sure they're not looking anywhere else. I need to do everything I can to keep them there because they're doing excellent work and I want to keep them there. And that's where we are in the zone of excellence. Our employers want to keep us there. Our families, our significant others want to keep us there. Our friends want to keep us there. Society wants to keep us in our zone of excellence because it's predictable. You can make a good living. You're doing good work for me. So I want you in your zone of excellence. Don't be branching out to something else, and don't go back to the zone of competence because you're doing great work. If you go back to your zone of competence, there'll be hell to pay, and I'm going to make sure you pay it. So that's the thing. You tend to want to be there a little bit because it's comfortable. Your spouse, significant other, your family wants you to be there because, hey, you're bringing home money and we need that. We need to function and it's predictable and you're going to be there, right? Your friends want you there. Society wants you to be there in your zone of excellence. And so most people never progress beyond the zone of excellence. So that begs the question, what is the zone of genius? We're going to get to the zone of genius right after our sponsor break here. You might have noticed we didn't have a sponsor break. I don't want a sponsor, but I'm making space for a sponsor. I'm a big believer in if you make space in your world for the things you want, you'll eventually get it. So that was my space for our sponsor. Anyway, now we're back from our break, from our sponsor break, and we're going to talk about the zone of genius once and for all. So the zone of genius is above the zone of excellence. Again, zone of excellence is where people want to hold you. They want to keep you. They want to pen you into the zone of excellence because you're doing good, repeatable, sustainable, quality work. And you're getting paid for it. And that's the main reason you want to stay in the zone of excellence and why you don't go beyond and strive for your zone of genius is because you're getting paid. And you're not sure you could get paid for working in your zone of genius because the zone of genius is aspirational. This is where you dream of being. This is your calling. This is the thing that's like you've had glimpses into your zone of genius. Everybody has, where you've had this, and I've talked about these before, as peak experiences where time passes quickly or without notice. It might slow down, it might speed up, but it's this peak experience where you don't even notice time. Time becomes irrelevant because you're just in this zone. You're in this flow state and time passes without notice. You know how to do the job instinctively. Nobody had to tell you. You just know the steps of the process. You're energized by the work. You're not drained by it. You feel energy while you're doing it. And you could do it for 10, 12, 18 hours a day. And you're exhausted after, of course, because you've put out all that energy. But it's like an energy generator when you're in your zone of genius and you're having these peak experiences. And my friend who I was speaking with at the airport, she said, oh, yeah, I would be exhausted afterward. And I said, well, but how did you feel during? Could you just keep going? And she said, oh, for sure. I could go. She said, I could go for hours. I could go much longer than a work day. And that's exactly how it is. She got that glimpse into her zone of genius. And we had talked about it conceptually before, but until she could relate it to her personal experience, when she's had those glimpses, she was like, oh, yeah, that is my calling. And so that's what the zone of genius is. It's your yearning. It's your calling. It's what you've had those tiny glimpses into. And you're like, man, I can't wait to do that again. But that's not my job. So I'll settle for something less. I'll dial it back to my zone of excellence where my significant other wants me to be, my kids want me to be, my family wants me to be, and most importantly, my employer wants me to stay there because I'm doing repeatable, quality, good work that they can count on. It's old reliable. That's where the zone of excellence is. But the zone of genius, which my friend saw on Sunday as we talked through this, she's like, that's where I want to be. And that's when she started to say, I'm in the wrong discipline. I'm studying. I'm in school for the wrong discipline. And I said, no, you're not. Not necessarily. I mean, there are things that you could do to hasten getting into your zone of genius a little faster, but you'll get there. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater in this scenario. You can continue on your path because it's motivating you and you can see yourself working in that field, but you won't be satisfied just getting a job in that field. You're going to want to be this inspirational teacher, this coach, this person who inspires others to action and to higher levels of work themselves, to inspire people into their zones of genius. So that's what we're talking about here. So that zone of genius is something that's rare. So like I said earlier, a lot of you, when you hear zone of genius, you're thinking, I do great work. I'm in my zone of genius 80, 90, 95% of the time. But you're not. Most people aren't. Most people get in there 5 to 10 to 15% of the time if they're lucky. And the rest of the time, they're hopefully in their zone of excellence, spending some time in the zone of competence, and hopefully a little bit of time in the zone of incompetence. But we are always in all four of those zones until we really break through and say, I'm gonna work toward my zone of genius, and I'm gonna get there 90+% of the time. And when I'm not in my zone of genius, I'm going to be in my zone of excellence for that other small percentage of the time, but I'm never going back to competence or incompetence. I'm going to outsource that. I'm going to have somebody else do that. And eventually, when you get to the point where you are really in your zone of genius, you're going to find ways to outsource your zone of excellence stuff as well. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about when we are in our zone of genius. So for me, I feel like I'm in my zone of genius, I said before, maybe 80-85% of the time. And this is why I do not hate Monday. I never hate a Monday. I look forward to Monday as much as I do Friday or Friday afternoon or whatever, just for a different reason, like I say, because I get to do the stuff I love to do during the week too. And I've worked into that because I've realized what my zone of genius is. And it's a lot like the same as my friends. I'm a coach. I'm a speaker. When I'm speaking on a stage or in an online event, I am in my zone of genius, and that's when I do my best work. I can riff on stories. I can present my message in a way where people are coming to me and they're saying, that was excellent. Thank you. And it's energizing to me. It's inspirational and energizing to them too. Excuse me. So you're having this impact on the world in your zone of genius. Now, how do you get there? And do people really get to be there? Well, I'm going to tell you I am, and I'm at 80-85%, but I'm not going to settle for that. I'm continuing to work through this, and I'm hoping in the year 2023 to move to 90% plus. And then eventually to get to the point where it's like, this zone of excellence work, I just don't have time for, because it's creating this opportunity cost, and that's what that is. When we think of the concept of opportunity cost, it's a term from economics, and I think I had a definition up, but I've lost it. Well, basically what it is, it's what you're sacrificing. It's a higher value thing you're sacrificing for doing something lower value. So let's go back to zone of incompetence, zone of competence. Writing with your non-dominant hand has a high opportunity cost, because you could do it better by writing with your dominant hand. And so choosing to write with your non-dominant hand has a very high opportunity cost. The opportunity being writing with your dominant hand. And so that's the difference there. That kind of helps us know. So there's a high opportunity cost for working in your zone of excellence once you've discovered what your zone of genius is. And it's a high emotional cost, a high spiritual cost, a high vibrational cost, but it's also a high monetary cost. Because if you can get paid because you're in your zone of genius and you're one of the best in the world at being in your zone of genius, any time you spend in any other zone is going to be costing you money. Now, in this book, The Big Leap, the author talks about his neighbor down the street who was a high-paid speaker or consultant. I don't remember, but his rate was about $10,000 a day, just pretty high pay. Well, he got himself a new printer, and he talks about how he's trying to install this printer into his computer, and it's not working. And he spent about 8 hours trying to get this printer to work, and then finally he gets a college kid down the street to come over, and the college kid hooks it up in 10 minutes. So the opportunity cost of him trying to fix his printer was greater than $10,000, because he spent a whole workday trying to do it when he could have been speaking or consulting and making $10,000, but he chose to hook up a printer in his zone of incompetence. So though he knew his zone of excellence, sometimes we still branch back to our zone of incompetence or competence or excellence. And he, in that situation, went to his zone of incompetence. So who are the people out in the world? Because you're thinking, nobody gets to do that. Nobody gets to work in their zone of genius. Yeah, they do. And they're usually, the most prime examples for us are people who are famously successful. The ones who are famously successful at whatever they do, you will find them working in their zone of genius almost exclusively. So let's take somebody, a great athlete, a famous athlete, and we'll go to one that's universally known, though he's not in the business anymore, Michael Jordan. I use him as one of my mistakes that make people hate Monday. He was arguably, if not the greatest basketball player ever, at least top 5. And so let's say that's his zone of genius, is playing basketball. Well, again, I'll use his example. It's a great one, because he moved out of his zone of genius to go play baseball at the pinnacle of his career. And he he moved back not even to his zone of excellence to play baseball. I would say he moved to his zone of competence, because at least he made it in the minor leagues. But compared to people who were in their zone of genius playing baseball, or even their zone of excellence playing baseball, he was in his zone of competence at best, but compared to them, maybe his zone of incompetence. And compared to basketball, it was a zone of incompetence. It really was, because he had no business being there when he knew what his zone of genius was. So he spent a year and a half in a zone that was not his zone of genius until he saw the error of his ways and had a 2-word press release that said, "I'm back." And Michael Jordan was back to basketball and to his zone of genius. And we will do that. But the famously successful people, let's go back to Michael Jordan. Let's use him as an example. At the pinnacle of his career, do you think he was doing his own dry cleaning? Do you think he was cooking his own food, making his own Easy Mac in his own microwave? I don't think so. I think he had people paying him. I think he had people like Nike bringing him shoes. He didn't even have to go shoe shopping. All of the things that we take for granted and we say, oh, well, yeah, I could work in my zone of genius, but I got all these chores to do and this and this and this and this. Once you really fully embrace your zone of genius and you know this is where I'm going to be, this is the highest value I bring to the world, so this is the highest value I'm going to get paid from the world, then you'll find the opportunity cost of being outside your zone of genius is not worth it. And it's better for you to outsource that by hiring someone, giving it to someone else to do, whatever it takes to be in your zone of genius 80, 90, 100% of the time. So you think about that. I want you to think about your zone of genius. Do you know what it is? So my friend Cindy that I talked to at the airport on Sunday, she got her glimpse into her zone of genius that night sitting at gate 44 at the Denver airport. A44, we're sitting there, and that's why I remember this. It had such a profound impact on me when she was discovering her zone of genius that I remember where I was, what it looked like. That was a peak experience for me because I was in my zone of genius explaining the zone of genius to her. Anyway, when she catches a glimpse of that, I told her, now you know what it is. There's no looking back. You're never coming back from this. And even though you're not in your zone of genius today, you know what you aspire to, and that's where you're headed. And so she'll get to a point where as she starts to work toward that, she'll get a little bit more time. And as she ramps up into her zone of genius, there'll be less time that she can spend doing other things. And so she'll find other people to do it for her, or her employer will find other people to do it for her, because the opposite message is what she got earlier in her career, that she was far too valuable to move up and do more. Now she's going to get the message, you're far too valuable to do anything other than your best work, your genius work, your art, as we might say sometimes. So that's how it starts to turn. The better and better you get at your zone of genius, and the more you show people that you're so good you can't be ignored, to quote Steve Martin again, that's where they're going to want to have you be. And I've experienced that in my career multiple times, and that's where I am now. So I do this. I do podcasting. I do coaching. I do speaking. I do inspiring. But I also have a day job right now that also allows me to work in my zone of genius a lot of the time. But even in that job, I'm not even 80% of the time in the hours I'm spending there in my zone of genius. It's something less than that, because there are things I do for that job, like video production. That's my zone of competence, maybe my zone of excellence. I'm pretty good at it because I have an interest in video production, but it's not my zone of genius. I wouldn't want to do that all day long because I don't like the editing and watching the video and trimming out all the little bloopers and mistakes and then overlaying motion graphics and music and all that stuff. It's fun when it's all over, but the actual work of doing it, a little bit of a drudgery for me. It's fun when it's done, so I'd say that's in my zone of excellence. But something like if somebody said, can you alphabetize these forms for filing? I know we don't do that anymore, but that's one of those things I've done in my past. It was clearly my zone of incompetence. I'm not very good at alphabetizing. So something like that, I'm not going to be able to do that well. And every hour I spend doing something in my zone of competence, incompetence, or even my zone of excellence is an hour sacrificed, an opportunity costed hour for what I could have been doing in my zone of genius. So the closer you get to your zone of genius, the closer you get to being Michael Jordan at whatever you do, the more you'll see, I've got to spend more time doing this. And as you move into your zone of genius and people understand that's where you're working and you're operating, they'll no longer want you in your zone of excellence. And I've had this happen. I had a boss come to me who knows of my background in management. I got 25 years of management experience. And I was working in a job that I wanted to do rather than what I was good at doing. And it was helping me get toward my zone of genius. And she came to me one day and she said, I've got this management role here at our company that I'm having a hard time filling. And I know you would be great at it. I can see your leadership. You've got experience. You've been a manager in corporate and retail and other environments. I think you'd be good at this. You want to throw your hat in the ring? And I said, no, I really wouldn't, with all due respect. I appreciate the compliment. I appreciate your confidence. But if I could write my own tickets, I would do this. And she said, well, that's what you do. And you do it so well. And that was when the light clicked for her to say, oh, well, I want you to do that. In fact, if you could do that full time, she could see the vision of all the things I could produce for that company. So she said to me, well, not only can you write your own job description, I want you to. Go write your own job description. Let's talk in a couple of weeks about this. And I did. I wrote my job description, presented it to her. She gave me a few tweaks, and that's my job description. That was the job description I moved into. And so I get to do, in that situation, I was able to do those things, got a lot closer to my zone of genius. There's still little things because I'm working for a company. I don't get to choose who gets to work for me. So I don't have assistants in this job that I've been doing. And it's one I'm doing in my day job now. I don't get to outsource a lot of this stuff, but some of the other work that they had me doing before is sort of fill-in work. They're like, yeah, we don't want you to do that anymore. Yeah, that's not where your value is. We want you to add value where your value is highest. So as you discover your zone of genius, you're going to want to work more and more toward that. So my friend that I talked about earlier, she has caught the bug, and I think I'm going to see her move into her zone of genius in the very near future. I just see that for her. I see her locked onto that target, and she's going to do that. And she's going to be able to do this, where she's going to say, yeah, I got to do this 90+% of the time. And if it's not my zone of genius, somebody else needs to do it. So the famously successful people, Michael Jordan, Venus Williams, Taylor Swift, Bradley Cooper, the people who are good at what they do in business, entertainment, education, medicine, the best of the best, those are people who are operating in their zone of genius, and they're getting paid for it. And you can get paid for it too, whatever your zone of genius is. And it doesn't have to be something big and fancy like an inspirational speaker, an actor, or a singer. You could be the best at whatever you do, whatever your zone of genius is. And again, what was that? It's those peak experiences where time passes without notice. You're in the flow. You gain energy while you're doing it, and you can't wait to do it again. All of those things, when you see those things and you isolate on those things that are glimpses into your zone of genius, you're going to start to figure out what you have to do to spend all or almost all of your time in your zone of genius. So that's the session. That's the episode for today. Finding your zone of genius. So what can you do? What can you do now? Excuse me, still nursing a cold. How do you get to your zone of genius? Well, it's just what I've talked about before and what I'm talking about now. It's those peak experiences. So I also call it that thing you rocked. Everybody's got at least one of these where you were doing a job and you were like, yeah, I was really in the flow there, and time passed without notice and I had all this energy. Isolate on those things that you rocked. Those are glimpses into your zone of genius. And you had those and you thought it was so much fun. Just wish I could do that every day, all day long. That's part of that peak experience. And when you can do that, when you can get to that, that's when you're in your zone of genius. And why would you not want to be there? And when you are there, you're the best at what you do. They will pay you the money for it. You'll be able to get rich doing it. And you might not get rich doing it for a company, but think of all the opportunities you'll have to consult on that thing that you do best, that zone of genius item, or that you could work as a contractor and you could get more business on your own and you could get paid the big money for whatever it is in your zone of genius. I don't care if it's being a basketball star or being a housekeeper. You could be in your zone of genius as a housekeeper. And think of that. Well, how could I make big money doing that? Well, maybe you own your own housekeeping business because you're so good at it. You can help other people be really great at it. And you have the best housekeeping business in the world. And you've got famously rich people having you come clean their house. And when they're famously rich, you can charge them what you want. If you're the best at it, they're going to want you. And you could say, yeah, I'll come clean your house for $40,000 a day. I'm happy to do that. And there's somebody who will pay you for it. So you got to dream big when we're talking about our zone of genius. Don't limit yourself. Don't say, oh, I could only go this far with it. You can go as far as you want when you're in your zone of genius and make as much money as you want when you're in your zone of genius, because there's plenty of money to go around. We're just enlarging the size of the pie rather than the slice. You're not taking from anybody to gain big for you. So work on your zone of genius. Figure out those things you rocked. Figure out 4 or 5 of them and find that common thread, because the common thread between those peak experiences, those things you rocked, that is your glimpse into your zone of genius. So subscribe to the podcast. Join me next time. These drop every Monday. This one's dropping on a Tuesday because I was sick and didn't have a voice yesterday. So subscribe, share it, tell people about it. Contact me. Go to lovemondaylikeFriday.com. You can connect with me, and I'll talk to you soon.